talked about here before. I'm looking forward to talking to Nancy Camp, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it too. Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
Hi. Now, Nancy is a voiceover performer. Now, tell us what that is.
Well, if you think about a commercial or a documentary or an audiobook, it's the voice you hear that you can't see on camera. So it can be anything from the announcer on the local news channel, you know, that's promoting as you're going out. It can be the very thoughtful voice on the nature documentary that's helping you understand what it is you're seeing there. It's the book you're listening to while you're riding in the car. Mm-hmm. It's the commercial you hate. So it's all those political spots that are pounding you.
You can be liked or hated, depending upon.
Yes.
Well, you know, we take that so for granted, don't we? I mean, it's sort of like the muzak of life. All of these voices that are going on the radio, on TV, or anywhere. You know that. How did you get into that business? We don't even really know about those people, do we? How those voices
No, we hang out in booths and try to be invisible.
Yeah,
in fact, when I first started in the business, it was really, you just never ever put your picture out anywhere. I work as an actor too, and of course as actors we have headshots, but you didn't ever promote that with your voiceover work. Because the idea is you want to cast me based on what you're hearing, not on what I look like. Because what you hear may project a very different picture in your head than what you'd see when I showed up. And it doesn't matter what I look like. So how I got into this is a little bit of a roundabout story. Years ago in undergraduate school, I got 2 fine arts degrees, one in theater and one in studio arts, most especially emphasizing printmaking and photography. And the mantra at the time, really in both cases, but particularly in acting, was there was no real practical way to make a living at it. With acting, what you got told repeatedly was, go to New York, wait tables, expect it to take a good 10 years of starving, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get somewhere.
Right.
And I did a lot of soul searching, and I thought, you know what, I don't have that fire in my belly. I'm too spoiled. I don't want to wait that long. So I took a different path. And wound up relocating back here in my prior job, which was being a public affairs specialist in biotechnology, healthcare, world food resource issues. And I just found that acting was unfinished business. So I jumped off the cliff, left my company behind, and began working as an actor. I went back to New York and got a lot of training, and I found, once I got back into it, that although I had never thought about it before, in fact, I'm not sure how much of a defined field it was way back in the day when I was in school, but once I got back into it in my later adulthood, I was really drawn to voiceovers. Mm-hmm. And so I've opted to not exclusively work in that area, but that's certainly where the vast majority of my performing work.
Well, one thing about the area that you sort of easily called voiceovers is that if you were to ask a student today, they might not even realize that that is a career option. Mm-hmm. That, you know, I come from the arts myself, and so, you know, there's certain things that are just not talked about that much. So how did you find it? How did you realize that you could develop a significant career in voiceovering?
Well, first of all, I get called all the time by people wanting to know, how do I get into this? And I always emphasize, it's not about your voice, it's about your ability to take words, often really lousily strung together words, and bring them to life, to lift them off the page. And to do that, you really need to have a core foundation as an actor. You need to have that skill set for building character, because even if I am reading the driest commercial in the world, it's still incumbent upon me to have a character, have a point of view, have all those things that actors do with copy to make it really work. In fact, I maintain the worse it is, the more incumbent it is upon me to try to do something with it. I learned about it because I was doing some on-camera work, and they hired me to continue and do several voiceover things connected to that. And I got in the recording booth and I realized, oh, this is really it.
Yeah. So
This
you
is
were
really
the opportunity crossed your path, and you were open to seeing the possibilities for yourself.
Yeah, it's like it's the classic, the light bulb went off over my head. I felt at home. I got in that teeny little dark room with the headphones on and the little mic staring at me and the whole claustrophobic thing of it, and I felt at home.
You could create a world of your own.
Well, I do all the time anyway.
Right.
And I think that's what I really realized was, oh, there's a place here for all those people and stories and things crowding in my head.
Because your website, www.nancycamp.com, don't miss that, is really a way to explore all the way that you use your voice in various and sundry things, the commercials, all of the vast array of things that you do. But I looked at one other thing, and that you are also an outfitted studio, are you not? For audio, you can record. You
Yes.
have your own place. Your own place.
That's really, I would say, really close to mandatory for voice actors today. What's happened with so many other fields, as digital technology advanced, it became more and more feasible to have high quality professional recording done with less and less equipment and less encumbrance. When I had my first studio back in the mid-90s, I had, oh Lord, maybe 8 pieces of equipment stacked on one another, and it was really complicated recording. I wasn't recording to tape, but we were still sending out demos on audio cassette. So, and it wasn't that long ago, I swear.
Right. Oh, well,
I swear, kids, it wasn't the dark ages.
Well, and the thing that fascinates me too is that here you are your sound technician, you are the manager of your own sound, but you are also a writer as well as being the performer. So when you take a job or you're getting ready to record something, where does all this come from? What are you recording? Do they, if you're working for a client, do they send you the material that they want you to work on, or the image that they want you to project for them?
Well, if it's strictly a voiceover job that I'm hired for, I'm going to have the script, and either it's going to be sent to me, I'll try not to get too technical, but in my studio, in my home, I am hooked up by ISDN, which is like a modem, a fancy modem that uses a very specific phone line. It actually uses 2 phone lines, and you have to have one at the other end, and it's a whole separate line setup. But if you have that, then they can record you from your recording booth in your home and get studio quality recording back at the other studio, wherever that studio is in the world.
Okay.
Or I might be hired, they'll send me something and they'll say, lay down 3 takes and load it up to the Dropbox or the FTP. Just load the whole file up,
so
and we'll finish it off.
They send you their material, you do 3 takes of it, and then they have.
Well, not always 3. It just
but
depends.
You know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In other words, you can send them, say, several versions.
Yes, well, I stay true to what the written text is, but I may try different vocal interpretations, character interpretations. Sometimes they call you up and they direct you while you're recording. Sometimes it's up to you to direct yourself. Sometimes I still go to studios all over the Washington and Baltimore area to record as well. So it's really a kind of a mixed bag. Now, I do have other work where I am tasked as producer, scriptwriter, and then I will also do some narrating of it too. That's really wearing a lot of hats.
It is. So do they cast you, say, a theme or something, and then ask you to come up with something that fits what they need?
Well, I'll give you an example of something. I just worked on a big project in January. I didn't want to say a whole lot about it, but it involved developing these 2-minute profiles of these highly lauded people, covering the scope of their life. Many of them were in their 70s and older. And we had to take their lives and reduce it down to 2-minute video profiles.
Oh my gosh.
And we couldn't do any original shooting. with the camera. So basically, we worked from a long interview that we did with them via this ISDN kind of a concept, and then whatever pictures we could get from them, other places where we could source material. So that's a case where we had to take somebody's entire professional life and distill it down into something that was meaningful, that represented them, but couldn't pretend to represent all of them, but also would be hopefully compelling to an audience. So there's that.
That's taking oral history to a whole new place.
Yeah. Oh, and we had to do 22 of these in a month. Yeah, so there's that too. Or, you know, there's plenty of times too when I'm hired as a producer or script writer, and I'm not the talent at all. I'm doing it for some other purpose altogether.
Of all these things that you've just talked about, we're coming down to the end of this section of the program, unfortunately. You know, just tell me, what of all of that you just told us about, what's your favorite thing to work on?
Oh, clearly voiceovers. I don't care if it's, I've got a set of stories that I'm now working on developing that's my own original material, and it's totally conceived of and done with the idea of being recorded, not a stand-up performer. But I love working with other people's material too, but clearly voiceovers. The reason I like voiceovers, and I'll try to get this in here really quickly, is that it's not about your voice. It's about your ability to deliver a story. And to me, I sort of think of story as a journey through the filter of emotion. And voiceovers strips away much of the instruments we have to deal with. There's no lighting, there's no stage, there's no costume. You don't get to see my movement, although there's plenty of that. So it's that intimate relationship that I can create between what comes out of my mouth and goes into the ear of the listener.
That sounds pretty terrific, doesn't it? You know, and I am so glad that we have Nancy here to sort of tell us what's happening when we're hearing the ads and the things that are happening on radio and sometimes even on TV, and we just don't realize it. We're going to come back in just a few minutes. Don't go away, because Nancy is going to demo her work for us.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
Well, we're back now with Stories in Focus. I'm Eloise Schottler, and we're here with Nancy Camp, who is going to invite us into her audio studio and show us how she works when she's recording.
So you need to pretend like you're all invited into my tiny little recording booth. There'd normally be a microphone right here. And I don't care about looking at you, I care about talking to your ears. So that's what the microphone does. This little piece is called How Toby Met the Dog. Toby was in a hurry. Well, actually, he was running just a little bit late, as usual. Try as he might, he just could never quite get out the door on time. So, here he was, once again, dashing madly down the street, cutting, rather daringly I might add, across the middle of the street, ducking around cars, bobbing back up onto the curb, and skittering across the gray ice scrapes on the half-shoveled sidewalks. He was headed into a section of the old warehouse district that most people would go to great lengths to avoid. But Toby didn't mind. No, heck, he'd been wandering through this part of town since he was a kid. He'd scarcely taken notice of how run down and seedy it had become over the years. It was just, well, part of the landscape of his life. Practically the only concession he'd made to the slow decay was that he no longer greeted folks he met along the way. In fact, he was careful not to even make eye contact with the shadowy figures that loitered on stoops and in the entryway of crumbling buildings with boarded-up windows. He climbed the street as it rose up the steep hill, anticipating the long view across several blocks once he reached the top. Sure enough, he could make out another whole block that had been flattened by the wrecking ball. That made 6 whole blocks in as many months. Now, they were vacant lots littered with bits of glass that gleamed in the light on sunny days, and trash that blew in the wind like old ghosts. In the middle of one block, he spotted something dark. As he got closer, he could see it was a dog, a beagle maybe, or no, wait, it was a basset hound. When he was less than half a block away, he could see the dog had something in its mouth. It was, no, could it be? It was a cigar. The basset hound was smoking a cigar. Toby did a double take and then immediately scolded himself. Don't stare, it's not polite, he thought to himself. So he kept walking past the dog, trying really hard not to look at him. He caught a big whiff of a stogie as he moved past, and he felt the dog's eyes following him, but he didn't dare look over at it. Just as he moved past it, he heard a gruff voice say, Yeah, but you wanted to look, didn't ya? Toby spun around and gaped, slack-jawed. But the dog was just sitting there, staring at him with his big basset eyes and the stubby cigar hanging out of the corner of his mouth. Toby started to think he was hallucinating or something. He stared at the dog, and the dog stared back. And they both blinked. Finally, Toby turned back around and started to walk away, and again he heard this voice. Hey, yeah, you, come here. How about a pet? Toby turned around and, well, it had to be the dog talking to him. So he walked over to the dog and gingerly reached out and very carefully gave the dog a little quick pat on the head, 'cause, he wasn't sure if the dog would snap at him or something. And the dog's eyes followed his hand as he got closer and closer until he was lightly brushing the top of the dog's head. And then Toby heard a big come from the dog. So then he was petting the dog's head more confidently, making soothing sounds and saying things like, there, and that's a good poochie. And the dog clearly loved this, and wriggled his butt and settled in, ready to let Toby pet him all day if he was of a mind to. Toby watched carefully as he continued to pet him, wondering if the dog was going to talk back to him again. Well, it didn't. But it clearly enjoyed being rubbed and petted and having its chin scratched, and it was really into a mellow basset hound kind of groove. Finally, Toby was feeling quite emboldened, and he said to the dog, what are you smoking that cigar for? Don't you know that's not good for you? And the dog didn't say anything. Then Toby reached over to the little stump hanging from the corner of the dog's mouth, and he pinched it between his thumb and forefinger and tugged gently, and the dog let go of the cigar. And Toby pulled it out and tossed it away and went back to petting the dog, saying things like, there, that's better, and oh boy, don't that feel good, huh, pup? And the dog really liked all the attention. Then Toby remembered he was already late, so he stood up and said, nice meeting ya. And the dog said nothing, just looked at him accusingly as if to say, you're not gonna walk off now, are ya? Toby stood there for a few minutes more, just looking at the dog, but he had to get going, so with one last quick pet on the dog's head, he turned and started back down the block. He got maybe 10 steps away, and behind him he heard, and he whirled around, and it was the basset hound. He couldn't tell if it was coughing or choking or what was going on with the dog, but it seemed to be in some distress. So he ran back to it, and the minute he got there, the dog went, and the dog stopped and just looked at him, waiting to be petted some more. At that point, Toby didn't know what he should do. But he had to get going. So he headed off again, and he got about the same distance away again, and it started all over again. And it sounded like the dog might be crying. So Toby dashed back to the dog, and the dog was managing to look really mournful at this point. Big basset hound eyes, all sad looking. And he summoned up his best, "I'm gonna make you feel guilty" face, and looked dolefully up at Toby. And Toby sighed, because he felt himself getting caught up in something.
Thank you. That's wonderful to watch what you're doing with that. You're totally into the piece, aren't you?
You need to be.
Yeah,
need
because
to
your
be.
facial expressions, everything that you carry us into it, but I can see you actually visualizing it and acting it as you speak it.
I do. I run movies in my head. That's how it works for me. I don't know what other performers necessarily do. I know some people, like audiobook performers in particular, you know, they may have a certain pair of slippers that they wear when they're in the booth. There's just all kinds of things people may do to get themselves into the mood. I've heard some people that have recurring books that are book narrators, for example, talk about there's a certain shirt they wear when they inhabit a character. Because there, with audiobooks, you're in the booth 4 to 6 hours a day recording.
Wow.
And so, you know, you want to embrace all of the things that you can to inhabit the primary character that you're reading. Now, this is a story, this is a clear story, and a commercial or a documentary narration is going to have a whole different feel and flavor to it. But you're never the dispassionate, disconnected narrator. You have a job, otherwise your voice wouldn't be needed. And so you have to make choices as an actor about what that job is going to be.
The thing, and we have had, excuse me, mostly performing storytellers. I'm a performing oral storyteller, so I never have a script. I don't memorize. It's not written down. Many
Right.
storytellers work that way. So I was fascinated. And how would you term? I see your acting coming in. You know, your training as a professional actor coming in. And I really admired the clarity of your diction, you know, the care that you took in presenting the material. How important are the timing, the pauses, the periods, the changes for you as you're working through a script?
Well, they should be organic. It happens that I wrote this material, but I wrote it quite a while ago. So other than looking at it briefly this morning before I came over here, it's not like I've been sitting here rehearsing this. And again, using an audiobook as an example, you go in there, you would have read the book, but you certainly haven't memorized it. You
No,
certainly
certainly
haven't. So it needs to be organic. I need to be in the action. I need to be in the zone of telling a story. And not thinking about the pauses, not thinking about, you know, how much time I take or how I inflect this. If I'm caught up in telling the story, it should happen of its own volition.
So what you're really talking about is this business of the ability to enter the story.
I think so. I'm a firm believer in that, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in a way, that's a bit of a lie, because at the same time, I need to be aware of all the mechanics of what's going on.
Yeah.
And there is a part of me that has to be the engineer. In a story like this, like when you're on mic, when you're on the listener's ear, as I like to call it, there are technical things you need to worry about doing, such as the coughing, all that kind of stuff. You can't blow that into the mic, or it's just going to blow up on you. It's just going to be way too loud. And so there are all kinds of techniques. There's ways to work with the mic to make things seem further away, closer together. There's all those sorts of technical things that, you know, you should have mastery of if this is the venue in which you're going to be telling the story. Just as for a stand-up storyteller, there's all kinds of things
Yeah,
to
because
master.
you're describing, I was just relating, as I was listening to what you were saying, I was relating to, as a performer, you know, the more I perform, then I'm always amazed at the capacity and the agility of one's brain. that, you know, where you have your
Hopefully.
story going and the audience is looking at you and you're aware of what's happening over here in the corner, you're aware of what's happening, and it's all going on right behind the story. So the story is out front, and all this other trappings that you're having to keep track of is going on right behind that story, and that's exactly what I feel you're describing, is that you're into the piece, but behind the piece is all these things you have to do as the producer, manager, or whatever of your world.
Yeah, I think another big difference is that when you're performing live, whether as a stage actor or storyteller, whatever, you get the goodies of having that relationship, living in the moment with the audience.
Right.
I don't when I'm in the booth. That's totally fabricated for me. And what works is to remember, and this is a really hard thing when I'm teaching this, you know, I find people stumbling with this all the time. You're not telling generally, even if it's a radio commercial that's going out to thousands of people, you're only speaking to one person. Why? Because when we hear things, we're hearing them one at a time.
Right, right.
And so my focus is always on one person, and the more specific I can make that person to whom I'm speaking, the better my performance is.
I think this is so helpful for storytellers that are going to be listening to this. I know one of the hardest things when I started recording for the station down here about 5 or 6 years ago is that I also do a 15-minute story. And to speak into a green circle where there's no one here in the room, where storyteller is accustomed to having a relationship with whoever's listening, so we're working seamlessly. I have to imagine the people on the other side. You know, otherwise the story doesn't happen without a visual listener or, you know, an imagined listener. So you're talking about something very similar.
Oh, absolutely,
but
yeah.
different contexts for it. Different
Yeah.
contexts.
You know who was great at that on camera was Mr. Rogers.
Absolutely.
He could, every kid that watched Mr. Rogers knew that he or she was the one kid that was being talked to by Mr. Rogers. You know, that was just a real gift. But that sort of magic appeals to adults as well.
It does. It does. We need to feel like we're really being talked to, or, you know, have somebody really responding to us as we go along. Nancy, I am so sorry. I am getting the 1 minute sign, and we're going to have to wind up now, and I'm sorry for that. I'm glad you came, and it's been really lovely having the demonstration and talking about what your relationship to voiceover is as an actor as well as a performer and a technician. I know you've enjoyed it, and don't forget www.nancycamp.com. Please come back. We have another guest next week.